On the day of his daughter's wedding, Elias Rowan was mocked by his future son-in-law in front of powerful guests. Everyone believed Elias was nothing more than a quiet old man who lived in the mountains with no purpose left in life. But what no one knew was that behind his silence lay a past filled with secrets, power, and a legacy that could shake the very company his arrogant son-in-law worked for. When the truth was revealed in the most unexpected moment, the entire wedding turned into a stage of shock, humiliation, and a lesson that would never be forgotten. This is not just a story about a wedding, but about how arrogance can blind us and how humility can unmask the deepest truths. Before we begin, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment about what you would have done in this situation. Now, let us step into the story of Elias Rowan and the wedding that no one present would ever forget. The mountain resort glistened in the fading glow of twilight. Lanterns swayed gently along the wooden paths, their golden light dancing across the polished glass windows of the grand dining hall. Snow clung to the distant peaks, while laughter, clinking glasses, and the murmur of voices echoed within. It was the evening before the wedding, a night meant for joy, unity, and celebration. Yet for Elias Rowan, seated at the far end of a long oak table, the air carried a very different weight. He was a man of quiet demeanor, dressed in a modest gray suit that bore the marks of age and wear. His silver hair framed a face that carried both softness and gravity, like pages of a book filled with untold stories. Though he sat among the crowd, most eyes drifted past him as though he were part of the wooden chairs or the polished stone walls. He did not seek attention, and attention rarely sought him. That he thought was fine, for in his silence he had always found clarity. Victor Hale, the groom, stood near the center of the hall, his voice carrying easily over the conversations around him. He was tall, handsome, and brimming with the kind of confidence that drew people in and demanded they listen. His tailored navy suit gleamed under the lights, and the smile he wore was sharp, calculated, and flawless. To his colleagues, Victor was a rising star at Novacor Industries, a man destined for power and wealth. To Elias, however, Victor was something else entirely. The older man listened quietly as Victor began retelling a story, this time at his expense. "You know," Victor said with a grin as he gestured toward Elias, "Clara's father lives like a hermit in the mountains. No television, no real career anymore, just books and firewood. Simplicity, he calls it, but to me it just sounds like boredom. I told him once he should try working a few shifts at a local hardware store. It might keep him busy, give him something meaningful to do." Laughter erupted at the table. Several of Victor's colleagues chuckled politely, not out of malice, but out of habit, the way people laugh when the boss tells a joke, even if it is not funny. Elias smiled faintly and lowered his eyes, his fingers tracing the rim of his glass. He did not reply, nor did he defend himself. That silence only emboldened Victor further. You see, Victor continued, a man is only as good as the influence he has in the world. Legacy, power, wealth. That is what people remember. The rest just fades into the background. The words hung in the air, heavy and careless. Clara shifted uncomfortably at Victor's side. Her eyes flickered toward her father, but Elias remained steady, his expression unreadable. Clara reached for Victor's arm and whispered something, but he brushed it off with a quick laugh. A waiter passed by, refilling glasses. Victor lifted his wine and raised it in Elias's direction. "To my future father-in-law," he declared, "a man of modest means, who proves that even the quietest among us can still enjoy a good meal, more laughter, more clinking glasses." Elias lifted his own glass in response, but his eyes never left Victor's face. Behind those calm, weathered eyes, a storm churned quietly, not of anger, but of resolve. The night pressed on, filled with chatter and merriment. Yet for Elias, the air seemed to tighten with each passing hour. He watched Victor laugh, with his peers slap backs and promise futures he had not yet earned. He saw in him a man who mistook arrogance for ambition, who measured worth in numbers and status rather than in kindness or integrity. But Elias did not speak. He did not reveal himself. To do so now would be too easy, too quick. No, the truth had to come later, revealed, not by his own voice, but by the weight of undeniable reality. Outside the hall, the mountains loomed cloaked in shadow. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying secrets only Elias could understand. He thought of his cabin, of the journals and documents hidden within, of the photographs locked away. Pieces of a story Victor could not begin to imagine. A story that was waiting, patient and inevitable, like the slow turn of the seasons. Clara approached him quietly later that evening. She sat beside him, her hand brushing against his. "Father," she murmured, her voice low, "why do you let him speak of you like that? Why do you let them all believe you are nothing?" Elias turned his head and looked at her. His smile was soft, but there was weight in his words. "Because, Clara, it is not my words that will teach him. It is his own blindness. A man reveals his character when he believes no one important is watching. Let him show himself, then he will learn." Her eyes glistened, torn between love for her father and loyalty to her soon-to-be husband. She wanted to protest, to demand the truth, but she stopped herself. Something in Elias's gaze assured her that patience would bring clarity. Later, as the guests departed and laughter faded into the cold night air, Elias lingered by the window of his room. He could see Victor below, laughing, still gesturing broadly, as if the world were already his. Elias's reflection in the glass was calm, but in his chest his heart beat with the quiet certainty of a man preparing for a storm. Tomorrow, he thought. Tomorrow the truth will come, and with it the lesson Victor never expected. That night Elias lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling beams of the old resort. The laughter of earlier hours still echoed faintly in his ears. He had been underestimated before. All his life people had looked at his modest clothes, his quiet ways, and assumed he was nothing more than what they saw. But the truth was that silence often concealed strength and humility often cloaked power. He thought back to the years long past when he and Marcus Drayton had built something out of nothing. Two young men with vision working late into nights, creating the foundation of what would one day become Novacore Industries. He remembered the sleepless nights, the drafts of designs, the arguments, the breakthroughs. And he remembered the choice he had made the day he stepped away, content to let Marcus lead the empire into the spotlight while he retreated into the quiet life of the mountains. It had been the right choice then. But now, watching Victor mock him with such arrogance, Elias wondered if fate had led him here for a reason. Perhaps it was time for the silence to break. The following morning the resort awoke to the sound of birdsong and the distant crash of waterfalls. Guests bustled about in preparation for the ceremony, their voices filled with excitement. Elias walked the grounds alone, his steps slow, his gaze thoughtful. He passed by groups of laughing guests, each dressed in finery, each too distracted to notice the quiet man moving among them. But Elias noticed everything. He saw the pride in Victor's walk, the way he boasted to others about his position at Novacore, about his inevitable rise to the top. He saw the nods of approval from those who listened, and he saw the flicker of discomfort in Clara's eyes whenever her fiancé spoke too boldly. Elias paused near the edge of the terrace where the view opened wide across the valley. The air was crisp, carrying with it the scent of pine and earth. He closed his eyes and let the wind wash over him. Somewhere deep within, he felt the weight of the day pressing forward the knowledge that what was hidden would soon be revealed. When he returned inside, Victor spotted him and strode over, clapping him on the back as though he were an old friend rather than a man he had ridiculed only hours earlier. "There you are, Elias," Victor said brightly. "You really ought to enjoy these moments more. Days like this are rare, you know. Still, I suppose when you don't have much else going on, maybe it doesn't feel so special." Elias met his eyes unflinching. For a brief moment, something in his steady gaze caused Victor's smile to falter. But it was gone in an instant, brushed away with another laugh. Elias only nodded. Perhaps he replied softly. But within him a quiet thought stirred. The time was nearing. Soon Victor would learn what it truly meant to underestimate the man standing quietly in the shadows. And so as the wedding preparations moved forward and Victor's arrogance grew with each passing hour, Elias remained silent. Yet behind his calm exterior, he was already setting the stage for what was to come. Because hidden within his modest life were secrets and symbols that would soon shatter every assumption Victor had ever made. The morning of the wedding dawned crisp and bright. Sunlight spilled over the snow-capped peaks, cascading into the valley, where the resort stood like a jewel carved into the mountainside. Guests moved about in elegant attire, their voices carrying excitement and anticipation. For many, this was a day of beauty and joy. But for Elias Rowan, it was also a day of testing, a day when masks would be worn and then torn away. He had chosen his mask carefully. The world saw only a quiet, modest man. He wore a suit that was simple, not new, but pressed with care. His shoes bore the faint creases of long years, polished but far from extravagant. To the guests, to Victor, to anyone who did not look closer, Elias was just what he appeared to be, an old man of no consequence. Victor noticed it at once. He strode across the room with the air of someone entering a stage, his every gesture meant to draw eyes. His suit shimmered, his tie was silk, his cufflinks gleamed with polished stone. He clapped Elias on the shoulder with a laugh that rang too loud. "Ah, there he is," Victor said. "Clara's father, the mountain sage. Elias, I was just telling the others how you live a life of absolute simplicity. No television, no internet, barely even a car. A man content with the little things. Admirable in its way, though not what I would call a real contribution to society." The words pricked like thorns, but Elias did not flinch. He merely smiled faintly and replied, "Simplicity has its lessons, Victor. It shows you what truly matters." Victor smirked, tilting his head as though humoring a child. "Perhaps. But you know I cannot imagine living without progress, without striving, without making a mark. A man is remembered for what he builds, not for how quietly he fades away." The colleagues around Victor chuckled. Elias sipped his water, his eyes calm, his silence steady. He knew Victor expected him to argue, to defend himself, perhaps to reveal more than he wished. But Elias had no intention of granting him that. The mask of humility remained firmly in place. As the day unfolded, Victor's arrogance grew like a vine. At lunch, when Elias requested a simple plate of vegetables, Victor laughed. "Still eating like a monk, I see. Careful, you might give the staff the wrong impression. They will think you cannot afford the better dishes." Elias merely replied, "Food is fuel. Its price does not change its worth." The table chuckled again, but some glanced uneasily at Clara, who sat stiff beside Victor. She touched her father's hand under the table, a quiet gesture of comfort. Elias gave her a reassuring squeeze in return. Later, Victor cornered him near the terrace. "You know, Elias, I like you. Truly I do. You remind me of the kind of men who built things once, but never moved on, men who never adjusted. I see it at Novacor all the time, the old guard clinging to the past while the world races ahead. It is sad in a way, but necessary. The future belongs to those who adapt, not those who linger." Elias studied him for a long moment. "Is that so? And do you believe yourself among those who adapt?" Victor grinned his teeth sharp in the morning Sunday. "Of course. I see opportunities where others see walls. I rise where others fall. That is why Marcus Drayton values me. That is why I will stand at the top one day. And that is why I will ensure Clara never wants for anything." Elias's eyes softened. "Do not mistake wealth for security, Victor, or status for strength. They can vanish faster than you imagine." Victor laughed, shaking his head. "You really should write these lines down, Elias. Perhaps you could publish a little book of wisdom. It might even sell a few copies." He walked away, leaving Elias by the terrace. The old man looked out at the valley below his heart, both heavy and resolute. Every word Victor spoke was another layer added to the mask Elias wore, and behind that mask the truth waited. That evening Clara sought him out again. They met in the quiet of his guest room, where the fire crackled softly and the scent of pinewood filled the air. She closed the door behind her and turned her face drawn with worry. "Father, why do you let him belittle you like this? Why do you let everyone believe you are less than you are? I cannot bear it." Elias placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Because, my dear, it is not me who stands in judgment. It is him. His words reveal his heart. The more he mocks, the more he shows who he truly is. And when the time comes, others will see it too. But why hide your past? Clara whispered, her eyes glistening. Why let him think you are nobody when you are? Elias hushed her softly. Because it is not about me. It is about you, about the life you will share with him. You must see what he is without me intervening. Only then will the truth matter. She bowed her head, torn between love for her father and the painful truth of his words. Elias watched her in silence, his heart aching for her. She was caught between two worlds, one of ambition, one of wisdom, and only time would reveal which would prevail. Outside, the laughter of guests echoed again. Victor's voice rose above them, all boasting of deals closed and promotions earned. He was in his element, basking in admiration. But every laugh, every sneer, every careless word only built a tower of pride, a tower waiting to collapse. Elias returned to his quiet seat at the edge of the hall. His mask of humility remained. Guests glanced at him occasionally, some with pity, some with dismissal. To them he was simply the quiet old man in the corner, forgotten in the glitter of the young and powerful. But Elias knew better. He knew the power of silence. He knew the strength of patience. And he knew that the higher Victor climbed in arrogance, the farther he would fall when the truth was revealed. The night drew on, and Victor introduced Elias once more to a group of colleagues. "This is Clara's father," he said with a grin. "Lives alone, keeps things simple, a reminder that not everyone can keep up with the times." One of the colleagues, a woman with sharp eyes, studied Elias curiously. "And what did you do before retiring, Mr. Rowan?" Victor answered before Elias could speak. "Oh, nothing noteworthy. A little here and there. But mostly he enjoys his peace now." Elias inclined his head, letting the words pass. The colleague hesitated, then nodded politely. But Elias noticed her lingering gaze, as though she sensed there was more beneath the surface. Victor laughed again, raising his glass. "I pride myself on reading people. Never once misjudged a man's character. And I assure you Elias here is as humble and harmless as they come." Elias lifted his own glass, meeting Victor's eyes. "Careful with such confidence, Victor. Assumptions can be costly." The words slipped into the air like a quiet warning, but Victor only laughed louder, certain of his own invincibility. Later, as Elias walked back to his room, the halls quiet around him, he paused before his door. He touched the pocket of his jacket, feeling the cool metal of the cufflinks he had chosen for tomorrow. Small, polished, and engraved with a symbol Victor had never seen, but Marcus Drayton would recognize instantly. Elias smiled faintly. The mask of humility would remain until the time was right, but when the truth emerged, it would not be spoken by him. It would reveal itself undeniable in the eyes of everyone who had doubted. And Victor, for all his arrogance, would not be ready. The night settled over the resort, but within Elias's room the silence was alive with memories. Locked inside his study trunk were journals, photographs, and papers that told the story of who he truly was. Tomorrow, as laughter filled the wedding hall, those secrets would no longer remain in shadows. The night was quiet, yet the silence in Elias Rowan's room was anything but empty. The fire in the hearth burned low, its glow casting shadows along the walls that seemed to shift with each flicker. Outside, the wind moved through the pines in soft sighs, carrying whispers from the mountains that had always been his closest companions. Elias sat alone at the wooden desk by the window, the cufflinks still resting in his pocket, their weight a constant reminder of what tomorrow would bring. But tonight there was another weight pressing against him. A weight carried not in metal or fabric, but in memory. Slowly he reached for the old leather trunk at the foot of the bed. Its hinges groaned faintly as he lifted the lid, revealing a careful order beneath leather-bound journals, manila folders, thick with papers, yellowing photographs and clippings from newspapers, long forgotten by most. He drew out one of the journals, its cover worn smooth by years of use. Inside the pages were filled with dense handwriting, diagrams of machines, equations, scribbled in the margins, and sketches of prototypes that had once been the foundation of something greater. Elias turned the pages slowly, his fingers brushing over ink that told stories only a few still remembered. At the center of it all there was a photograph. Two men stood side by side, younger, then their eyes lit with the kind of fire that only comes with vision. One was Elias himself, his hair dark, his posture sharp with determination. The other was Marcus Drayton, the man who now sat at the head of Novacore Industries, the man Victor idolized as a mentor and leader. Elias stared at the photograph for a long time. He remembered the day it had been taken, the early morning light, in a cramped workshop, the smell of oil and burning circuits. He and Marcus had been unstoppable then, two dreamers who believed they could reshape the world, and in many ways they had. Novacore had risen from those late nights and endless sketches, becoming a titan of industry, a beacon of innovation. But the world remembered only Marcus Drayton, not the man who had chosen to walk away. Why had he walked away? That question still followed him, though the answer had always been simple. Marcus craved the stage, the spotlight, the relentless pursuit of growth. Elias had craved peace, freedom, and the solace of silence. He had no interest in living every day beneath the weight of shareholders and media. He had seen the empire take shape, and had known that Marcus could carry it forward. Elias had left not in defeat but in choice. Still, as he traced the outlines of the photograph, he wondered if that choice had brought him here for a reason. Perhaps this wedding, this clash of arrogance and truth, was the moment when silence could no longer remain unbroken. A knock broke his thoughts. Clara stepped in quietly, her presence soft as the firelight. She closed the door behind her and came to stand beside the desk. "You are awake," she said gently. Her eyes drifted to the open trunk, to the papers spread across the desk. "I thought I would find you here." Elias gave a small nod. Some memories do not let a man rest. Clara's gaze fell on the photograph. She picked it up, her brow furrowing as she studied the two young men. "This is you. And Marcus Drayton." Elias leaned back in his chair, the corners of his mouth lifting in a quiet smile. "Yes, long ago, before the world knew his name, before anyone knew mine." Clara turned sharply toward him, her voice hushed but intense. "You were part of Novacore. You helped build it. Why have you never told me this? I wanted you to know me as a father, not as a name in a boardroom." Elias replied softly. "Fame is fleeting. Legacy, true legacy, is not what is written in headlines. It is what remains when the noise is gone." Her eyes shimmered with tears torn between admiration and frustration. "But he does not know. Victor does not know. He mocks you, thinking you are nothing. Why let him continue? Because Elias said firmly he must reveal himself. If I had told him the truth, would he have treated me differently? Of course. But it would not have been real. He must learn Clara. Not from me, but from his own blindness. He must stumble over his own arrogance before he can rise as a man worthy of you." Clara's hands tightened around the photograph. She wanted to argue, but something in her father's steady voice rooted her in silence. He was not a man who acted on anger or pride. Every choice he made was weighed, patient, deliberate. And though her heart ached, she trusted him. She set the photograph down carefully and whispered, "Then I will wait. But I pray he does not destroy everything before he learns." Elias rose and placed his hands on her shoulders, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "So do I," he murmured. Later that night, when Clara had gone, Elias pulled out another piece from the trunk, an article clipped from a decades-old newspaper. The headline read, "Two innovators revolutionize artificial intelligence, Novacore, born from vision and perseverance." Beneath the bold letters was another photograph of him and Marcus shaking hands at a press conference. He remembered the sound of cameras flashing, the questions shouted by eager reporters, the glow of victory. And he remembered the exhaustion in his bones, the longing for quiet, for a life beyond the endless climb. He placed the article beside the cufflinks on the desk. The metal gleamed in the firelight, etched with the Novacore emblem. Marcus had given them to him in those early days, a symbol of partnership, of unity. Elias had not worn them in years. Tomorrow he would wear them again. And when Marcus saw them, when Victor saw the recognition in Marcus's eyes, The mask of humility would begin to crack. The next morning, as dawn crept across the peaks, Elias dressed in silence. He placed the cufflinks carefully on his sleeves, fastening them with hands that trembled, not with fear but with anticipation. Each click was a promise, each gleam a reminder of what had been and what was yet to come. When he looked into the mirror, he saw not just the quiet man others dismissed, but the man who had once built an empire from nothing. The mask of humility remained, but beneath it truth waited like a blade hidden in its sheath. Outside, the wedding day stirred to life. Guests moved about with excitement, flowers were arranged, music rehearsed. Victor walked among them with his usual pride, laughing, boasting, shaking hands. He did not glance at Elias except to offer another careless comment about how comfortable retirement must be. Elias said nothing, but when Victor looked away, Elias allowed himself a faint smile, because soon, very soon, the past would no longer remain in whispers. The stage was being set not by Victor's ambition, but by Elias's silence. And in the quiet moments behind locked trunks and hidden memories, a storm gathered. By the time the vows were spoken, that storm would break, and Victor would find himself standing at its center with no shelter to hide behind. The morning of the wedding was alive with music and the rustle of silk gowns. The mountain resort pulsed with color-white blossoms spilling across tables and arches, golden ribbons fluttering in the cool breeze. Guests gathered in the courtyard, exchanging laughter and compliments, while staff hurried past with trays of champagne and polished silver. It was a day crafted to perfection, a stage for joy. But within that beauty, Clara Rowan felt the threads of tension pulling tighter. She moved among the guests, smiling when expected, answering questions politely, yet her mind was elsewhere. Her father's words from the night before echoed in her thoughts. His calm insistence that Victor had to be tested, his silence in the face of humiliation, his refusal to reveal who he truly was. Clara's heart twisted. She loved Victor, she truly did. From the moment she had met him, his energy had dazzled her. His ambition had seemed like strength, his confidence like leadership. She had believed in him, believed he would build a future where she could feel safe, admired, and cared for. But lately that confidence had begun to show cracks, and in those cracks she saw arrogance, cruelty, and a blindness she could not ignore. She found her father standing alone near the gardens, hands folded behind his back, gazing out at the horizon. He looked peaceful, but Clara knew peace did not mean ease. "Father," she said softly, approaching him. He turned his face calm, his eyes steady. "Clara." Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I cannot bear it. He mocks you in front of everyone, and you allow it. You sit in silence while he calls you nothing, and yet you are so much more. Why do you endure it?" Elias rested his hand lightly on her shoulder. "Because the truth, my dear, must come from him. If I reveal myself, he will respect me out of fear or greed. But if he reveals his heart, the world will see what he is without me speaking a word. That is the only way the lesson will matter." Clara shook her head, her frustration breaking through. "But what if the lesson costs me everything? What if he cannot change? What if the man I love is not the man I thought he was?" Elias's gaze softened, though his words carried weight. "That is why you must see him clearly, Clara. Love is a gift, but it is also a choice. Better to choose with eyes open than to stumble blind." Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. Around them, the chatter of guests continued, oblivious to the storm brewing within her. Later, Clara returned to the reception hall where Victor was surrounded by colleagues. He was speaking with his usual force, gesturing with a glass in hand, laughter bursting from those around him. She watched him from the edge of the room, her heart torn. Victor caught sight of her and pulled her close, placing an arm around her waist. "Clara, darling," he said proudly, "I was just telling them about the future, about how Novacor will expand overseas, about how Marcus trusts me with projects no one else could handle. In a few years, I will be standing at his side, second only to him." The colleagues nodded, impressed, though some with forced smiles. Victor's ambition was undeniable, but his arrogance was difficult to ignore. Clara forced a smile, though her heart sank. Then Victor spotted Elias across the room. His grin sharpened. Ah, there is the man himself, my future father-in-law, the hermit of the mountains. He raised his voice so others would hear. Tell me, Elias, how is life in solitude? Do the trees give you advice when the world becomes too complicated? The group laughed, some uncomfortably. Clara's hand tightened on Victor's arm. Stop, she whispered fiercely. But Elias only gave a faint smile. The trees are wiser than we give them credit for, he said quietly. They stand through storms and seasons without arrogance, without need for recognition. There is much a man could learn from them. Victor chuckled, shaking his head. Always with the riddles, Elias. Perhaps you should write poetry. I hear it pays well if you sell enough books to tourists. Clara could no longer hold back. She pulled away from Victor and hissed. Do you hear yourself? Do you realize how cruel you sound? Victor blinked, taken aback by her sudden anger. Clara, I am only joking. He does not mind. Look at him. He is smiling. But Clara knew better. Her father's calm was not weakness, it was strength. And it was that strength that made her heart ache all the more. She excused herself, retreating before her emotions betrayed her further. Hours passed. The preparations grew frantic as the ceremony drew near. Guests adjusted gowns and ties, photographers checked lenses, musicians tuned their instruments. Amid it all, Clara found herself torn between two worlds, the man she loved and the man who had raised her. In her room, she sat before the mirror, her wedding gown draped across the chair untouched. Her maid of honor urged her to dress, but Clara waved her away, lost in thought. She stared at her reflection, asking herself questions she feared to answer. Did she love Victor, or did she love the idea of him? Was her heart bound to his ambition, or had she mistaken pride for promise? And if her father was right, if Victor was blind to true worth, could she spend a lifetime trying to change him? The questions pressed like weights upon her chest. She buried her face in her hands, her breath trembling. Meanwhile, Elias prepared himself in silence. He retrieved the cufflinks from the desk, fastening them to his sleeves with careful precision. He looked at himself in the mirror, an old man in a simple suit, yet with the gleam of something far greater hidden beneath. The journals and photographs remained locked away in the trunk, but the truth was no longer entirely hidden. Clara knew, and soon Marcus Drayton would know. Then Victor would face what he had mocked without understanding. Elias whispered to his reflection, "It is not my pride that must speak today. It is his." The ceremony approached. Guests filled the courtyard, their voices hushed with anticipation. Music began to drift from violins, soft and sweet. Clara emerged at last in her gown, radiant yet pale, her eyes shadowed with doubt. She walked with her bridesmaids, her steps steady, but her heart unsteady. Victor stood at the altar, his smile dazzling, his posture flawless. To the guests he looked every bit the perfect groom. To Clara his smile felt like a mask. She glanced toward her father, who stood at the edge of the gathering. Their eyes met. His look gave her strength, though it also reminded her of the truth she now carried. The vows would soon be spoken, and with them the future sealed. But Clara's heart was not at peace. She loved Victor, yet doubts gnawed at her with every step she took. She loved her father, yet his silence left her burdened with questions she could not answer alone. As she reached the altar, the weight of choice pressed upon her. Victor took her hand, smiling as though nothing else in the world mattered. The guests sighed in admiration. The music swelled. But in Clara's heart a storm raged. Her dilemma was no longer hidden. It lived in every breath she drew, every glance she cast at her father. Would she bind her life to Victor, trusting he could change? Or would the truth her father carried soon break everything apart? The vows began words of love and promise carried into the mountain air. Yet beneath the beauty shadows stirred. For while Clara wrestled with her heart, Elias knew the moment of revelation was drawing near. And when it came, no vow, no promise, no mask could withstand the truth. The courtyard shimmered in sunlight as the vows echoed into the mountain air. Guests leaned forward with smiles, their eyes fixed on Clara and Victor standing at the altar, the perfect couple framed by flowers and sky. The air carried the sweetness of roses, the soft hum of strings, and yet beneath that beauty Elias Rowan felt the quiet tightening of the storm. Victor's smile was dazzling, practiced a performance as flawless as the lines he recited. His promises came smooth rehearsed, spoken with the confidence of a man who believed words alone could bind the future. Clara's responses were steady, though her eyes betrayed unease. To the guests, she was radiant. To her father, she was a woman torn between love and doubt, her heart trembling in the shadow of truth. When the ceremony ended, the crowd erupted in applause, the music swelled, and the celebration began. Champagne flowed, laughter spilled across the hall, and Victor moved through it all like a king among subjects. He clasped hands, delivered jokes, and painted visions of his future. Yet every step he took only tangled him deeper in the web of his own arrogance. That afternoon, as the guests filled the grand reception hall, Elias observed quietly from the edges. He had taken his place at a corner table, his modest suit blending with the shadows. To most he was invisible, but his eyes saw everything. Victor basked in admiration, surrounded by colleagues from Nova Corps. He spoke of new projects of international expansion, of his special relationship with Marcus Drayton. His voice carried with conviction, but beneath it Elias heard the cracks, a man convincing himself as much as the world. Then came the moment Elias had been waiting for. Victor spotted him sitting alone and beckoned him over with a grin. "Come, Elias," he said loudly, ensuring others would hear. "Join us. My colleagues must meet the man who raised such a lovely daughter." Elias rose, his movements measured, and stepped into the circle. Victor placed an arm around him, his tone dripping with irony. "This is Elias Rowan," he announced. "Lives up in the mountains, retired long ago. A man of simplicity. Some would call it admirable, though I would say he simply prefers life without ambition. Imagine, gentlemen, never having to worry about the weight of responsibility. Just chopping wood, reading books, and watching the seasons turn." The group chuckled, though some glanced at Elias with polite discomfort. Elias inclined his head slightly. "Simplicity can reveal truths ambition cannot," he said softly. Victor smirked. "Perhaps. But in my world, ambition is the truth. Legacy is the truth. And without those, a man is forgotten." The words hung sharp like glass against the skin. Clara, standing nearby, bit her lip until it nearly bled. One of the colleagues, a woman with clear, searching eyes, asked gently, "And before retirement, Mr. Rowan, what did you do?" Elias opened his mouth, but Victor's voice cut across like a blade. "Oh, nothing remarkable. A few odd things, I suppose, but nothing worth noting. He has no ties to business or politics, no achievements to his name. A quiet life, really. But we all need such people in the world, do we not? They remind us how far the rest of us can climb." Laughter again, though less this time. The woman gave Elias a lingering look, suspicion in her eyes. Elias only replied, "Appearances can be deceiving." Victor raised his glass high. "Not when you know how to read people, Elias. I pride myself on that skill. Never once misjudged a man's character, and I assure you I see yours clearly." Elias's gaze was steady. "Confidence can blind as much as it guides. Be careful not to stumble." For the briefest moment, silence pressed into the circle. Victor's smile wavered before returning brighter than ever, his laugh too loud, too forced. "Always the riddles," he said, brushing it away. "You should hear him at dinner. It is like listening to a monk trying to advise a king." The group laughed, but their amusement was thinner now. Elias returned to his seat, his heart heavy yet resolute. Each word Victor spoke was another strand woven into the web he spun around himself, and when the time came, that web would ensnare him fully. Later, as the reception swirled into music and dance, Elias excused himself to the quiet of his room. He opened the small wooden case where the cufflinks gleamed, polished until they caught the firelight like tiny suns. He placed them gently on the desk beside a folded envelope, the wedding gift, a check so large it could never be mistaken as the gift of a man of modest means. The mask of humility still covered him, but the symbols of truth were ready. The cufflinks, the gift, the memories. Tomorrow, or perhaps even tonight, The truth would step from the shadows. Elias closed the case and stood before the mirror. His reflection stared back. A man underestimated, a man mocked, yet a man unbroken. He whispered to himself, "Let him weave his web. Soon he will be trapped within it." Meanwhile, Clara sat in a quiet hallway, her gown spread across the marble floor, her hands trembling. She had heard every word at the table, every insult, every boast. Her heart ached with love, fear, and doubt. Victor found her there, his smile bright as ever. "Darling, what are you doing sitting alone? Come, everyone is asking for you." Clara looked up, her eyes shimmering. "Why do you treat my father that way?" she asked softly. Victor blinked, surprised. "What way? You humiliate him. You laugh at him. You speak as if he is nothing." Victor chuckled, brushing it off. "Clara, it is harmless. He does not mind. He knows his place. Some men are born to greatness, others to simplicity. It is the way of the world." Clara's voice rose, trembling with anger. "You are blind. You see only what you want to see." Victor frowned, his charm faltering. "Why are you defending him so fiercely? He is your father, yes, but surely you see what I see. He is kind, but he is ordinary." Clara turned away, unable to answer without betraying what she now knew. She pressed her hands to her chest, praying that her father's silence would soon end, that the truth would emerge before she bound herself to a man who could not see worth beyond appearances. Back in the reception hall, Victor toasted again and again, his voice ringing across the tables. He spoke of wealth, of progress, of legacy. He painted himself larger than life, spinning visions of what he would achieve, how he would rise to stand beside Marcus Drayton himself. Guests clapped, some with genuine admiration, others with weary smiles, and Elias from his quiet corner watched with the patience of a man who knew storms could not be rushed. They built themselves moment by moment until lightning struck of its own accord. Night deepened. The hall glowed with candlelight, the music softened, and the laughter dimmed into murmurs. Elias slipped away once more to his room, closing the door behind him. He placed the cufflinks into their box, sliding it into his jacket pocket. His fingers lingered on the folded envelope. "Tomorrow," he thought, "tomorrow the web will break." He leaned against the window, gazing out at the mountains wrapped in shadow. The wind stirred again, carrying whispers through the pines. They seemed to echo his thoughts, quiet but certain. The world thought him invisible. Victor thought him irrelevant. But truth had a way of emerging when the time was right. And when it did, it would shatter everything Victor believed. The web of deception had been woven tight. Victor, blind to his arrogance, danced deeper into its strands with every word he spoke. And as the night gave way to dawn, Elias knew the moment of revelation was close. The stage was set, the pieces aligned, and soon the storm would strike. The dawn of the wedding day broke with a brilliance that seemed almost unreal. Sunlight spilled across the mountains, catching the snow on the peaks and scattering it like shards of glass into the valley below. The resort came alive with movement, florists adjusting bouquets, chefs barking orders in the kitchens, musicians rehearsing under the pergola where vows would soon be spoken. The air itself seemed charged, humming with anticipation. Elias Rowan rose before most of the guests. He stood before the mirror in his room, fastening the cufflinks with deliberate care. The metal gleamed, each engraved with the symbol of Novacor, a design that only one man alive would truly recognize. His reflection showed a man dressed simply, but not meekly. A man who wore his history hidden beneath a mask, waiting for the right moment to be unveiled. He touched the folded envelope on the desk, the gift for Clara and Victor. 50,000, a sum that would strike any observer as impossible for a man of his supposed modest means. It was not the money that mattered, but what it symbolized. A subtle key that would unlock questions and force Victor to confront truths he had mocked for far too long. Elias slipped the envelope into his jacket pocket and drew a slow breath. Today, silence would give way to revelation. The resort's courtyard filled with guests dressed in silks, linens, and tailored suits. The chatter was bright, the laughter frequent, yet beneath it all tension lingered in Clara's heart. She stood with her bridesmaids radiant in her gown, her smile carefully placed for the cameras, but her eyes, when no one watched, flickered toward her father. She remembered their conversation from the night before, his insistence that Victor must reveal his true nature without prompting. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that patience would reveal the truth. Yet as she prepared to bind her life to Victor, fear gnawed at her. What if her father was wrong? What if Victor's arrogance was not a flaw to be corrected, but a foundation too deep to be moved? The music swelled. Clara walked down the aisle on her father's arm. Guests turned gasps, rising at the sight of her gown, the flowers, the glow of the ceremony. Victor stood waiting, his smile flawless, his posture proud. But Elias felt the faint tremor in Clara's hand as he guided her toward the altar. He glanced at her and gave a small nod, a silent reassurance. Her grip tightened, then steadied. The vows began. Victor's words flowed like silk. Promises of devotion, loyalty, and partnership delivered with practiced ease. He spoke of futures filled with wealth, with travel, with power. To the guests, his voice carried conviction. But to Elias, it was another performance, another act in the theater Victor had built around himself. When it was Clara's turn, her voice trembled. She spoke the words, but her eyes darted toward her father again, as if seeking strength. Elias met her gaze steady and calm. It was enough. She finished her vows, though her heart still churned with doubt. The ceremony ended in applause, and the courtyard erupted with cheers. Victor kissed Clara's hand with a flourish basking in the adoration of the crowd. He turned, raised his glass to the guests, and declared, "Today marks not only the union of love, but the forging of a future where we rise together, where we build legacies that last forever." The guests cheered again, their glasses raised high. Elias remained silent. His time had not yet come. The reception hall gleamed with candlelight and crystal. Long tables stretched across the room, heavy with food and drink. Music played, laughter rang, and the air was thick with celebration. Victor moved through it all like a prince among courtiers, his arm around Clara, his voice carrying over the music. At last he led her to the head of the room where Marcus Drayton himself had just arrived. The CEO of Novacor, Victor's mentor, the man whose approval meant everything. Guests stirred with excitement at the sight of him rising to greet him with handshakes and praise. Victor beamed. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He pulled Clara close and gestured proudly. "Marcus," he said, his voice ringing, "allow me to introduce my wife Clara." And this, he turned toward Elias with a smirk, is her father, a quiet man, retired, living simply, no career to speak of, but full of riddles and stories, a reminder that not everyone is meant for ambition. The laughter that followed was polite, hesitant. Clara froze, her heart pounding. Elias remained still, his eyes steady on Marcus. Marcus's gaze fell on Elias, and for a moment his expression froze. His eyes dropped to the cufflinks, then widened with recognition. The room seemed to still, the music fading into silence as Marcus stepped forward. "Elias," he breathed, his voice full of disbelief and awe. "Elias Rowan." The guests exchanged puzzled glances. Victor frowned, uncertain. Marcus clasped Elias's hands, his voice rising. "How long has it been?" "Decades. Decades since the day we built Novacor together. I thought you had disappeared into the mountains, but here you are." The hall erupted in murmurs. Guests turned whispers, darting like sparks. Victor's face drained of color. Clara's eyes filled with tears, her hand flying to her mouth. She looked at her father, her heart swelling with pride and relief. Victor stammered, his voice breaking. What do you mean, he is just—" Marcus turned sharply, his eyes blazing. "Just. Do you not realize who stands before you? This man is no hermit, no simple retiree. He is the co-founder of the company you serve. Without him, Novacor would not exist." The words thundered across the hall. Victor swayed as if struck, his arrogance crumbling in an instant. Guests gasped, their eyes darting between Victor and Elias. The web he had woven collapsed, leaving him exposed before them all. Elias remained calm, his expression unchanged, as though he had expected this all along. He inclined his head to Marcus. "It has been a long time, my friend." Marcus smiled, his grip tightening on Elias's hands. "Too long, and I will not let another day pass without giving you the respect you deserve." Victor stumbled backward, his face pale, his voice weak. I... I did not know. I could not have known. But the damage was done. The hall was alive with whispers, the air thick with judgment. The mask Victor had worn had shattered, leaving only the truth. A man who had mocked greatness without ever seeing it. Elias did not gloat. He did not raise his voice or bask in triumph. He simply returned to his seat, leaving the storm to swirl around Victor. The moment of revelation had come, and with it the fall of arrogance. But the night was not over. The confrontation had only begun. Victor's humiliation was complete, but the judgment was not yet delivered. The guests watched, waiting for what Marcus would say next, for how Elias would respond. And as Victor fell to his knees pleading for forgiveness, the room held its breath. The storm had broken, but its final strike was still to come. The grand reception hall was silent but for the echo of Marcus Drayton's words. The declaration hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. This man is no hermit, no simple retiree. He is the co-founder of the company you serve. Every guest turned their eyes fixed on Elias Rowan. For years he had lived unseen, underestimated, regarded as nothing more than a quiet father of the bride. Yet in a single moment the illusion had shattered. He was revealed for what he truly was. Not a forgotten man in the mountains, but the architect of a legacy that stretched across the globe. Victor Hale stood frozen, his face pale, his lips parted in disbelief. The man he had mocked, belittled, and dismissed as irrelevant was the very foundation of his career, the silent partner behind the empire he idolized. Whispers broke out across the hall. Guests leaned toward one another, voices sharp with curiosity. Some murmured praise for Elias. Others gasped at the audacity of Victor's arrogance. Clara stood at her father's side, tears glistening in her eyes, torn between anger at her husband and pride in her father. Marcus released Elias's hands, but kept his voice loud enough for all to hear. "You deserve more than this, Elias. More than to be mocked at your own daughter's wedding. Victor should fall to his knees in apology for the disrespect he has shown you." All eyes turned to Victor. He swallowed hard, his throat dry, his pride crumbling. He opened his mouth, but no words came. His colleagues stared, some with pity, most with disdain. The man they had admired only hours before now seemed small, stripped of all dignity. At last Victor dropped to his knees. The sound of it echoed across the marble floor. He bowed his head, his voice breaking. "Forgive me. I did not know. I was blind. Please, Elias, forgive me." The hall was silent. Guests held their breath. Even the music faltered, the violinists lowering their bows. Elias looked at Victor, the man who had so confidently mocked him, now trembling in the ruins of his arrogance. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he rose slowly, his steps measured, and stood before Victor. His voice was calm, steady, carrying the weight of years. "You judged me by what you saw. You decided my worth, from my clothes, my home, my silence. You believed that wealth and power alone defined a man. And now, stripped of your pride, you see what such blindness has brought you." Victor shook his head, tears in his eyes. "I was a fool. I let ambition blind me. I see it now. Please do not let Marcus take everything from me. Give me one chance to prove I can be better." Marcus stepped forward, his jaw tight. "Better you insulted the man who gave us everything. If it were my choice, you would be dismissed from Novacor by morning." Gasps filled the hall. Victor's colleagues nodded, some in agreement, others in grim satisfaction. Clara pressed her hands together, her heart torn between love for her husband and fury at his pride. But Elias raised his hand, silencing Marcus. His eyes, sharp yet merciful, remained fixed on Victor. Firing him will not teach him. Punishment alone does not change a man's heart. It is the lesson learned in humiliation and facing oneself that has the power to transform. He turned slightly, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. I do not ask for vengeance. I ask for change. If Victor is to remain at Novacor, let it not be because of his ambition, but because of his humility. Let him learn to see value where once he saw only weakness. Let him remember this day not as the day of his triumph, but as the day he was broken and given a chance to rise differently. The room was silent again, but this silence was not heavy. It was thoughtful, reverent. Marcus studied Elias, then nodded slowly. If you ask it, I will honor it. Victor may remain, but his probation will be strict. His place will not be secured by arrogance, but by proving himself worthy. Victor lifted his head, his eyes wide with relief. Thank you, he whispered hoarsely. Thank you both. I swear I will change. I will never again judge a man by what he appears to be. Clara stepped forward, then her voice trembling but firm. And I will hold you to that promise. For you are my husband, but my father is my heart. If you disrespect him again, you will lose me forever. Victor's shoulders sagged. He nodded, tears slipping down his face. I will not forget. I swear it. The tension broke slowly, like clouds parting after a storm. The music returned tentative at first, then rising in strength. Guests began to murmur again, though their voices carried a different tone now. Respectful, reverent. They looked at Elias with new eyes, no longer as a quiet old man, but as a figure of strength and wisdom. Elias returned to his seat, his expression calm, though his heart was heavy with reflection. He had not sought to humiliate Victor. He had sought to teach him, and in the boy's broken pride perhaps the seed of change had been planted. Clara sat beside him, slipping her hand into his. You were right, she whispered. He had to reveal himself. And now he must carry the weight of what he has done. Elias gave her hand a gentle squeeze. And so must you, Clara. Love is not blind, no matter what poets say. It sees clearly, and chooses anyway. Now you know the truth of the man you married. The choice to stand beside him will be yours every day. Clara's eyes shimmered, but she nodded. Her father's wisdom was steady as the mountains. She would carry it with her even as she walked into the uncertain future of her marriage. As the evening wore on, the mood of the hall shifted. What had begun as a celebration of beauty and wealth had become something else entirely. A lesson whispered among guests, a reminder carried on every tongue. They spoke not of Victor's arrogance, but of Elias's silence. Not of wealth, but of humility. Not of ambition, but of wisdom. When the night ended and the guests departed into the cool mountain air, Clara and Victor stood together at the door. Victor's hand was warm in hers, though it trembled still. He bowed his head in respect. Each time a guest passed no longer the man who demanded attention, but one who sought forgiveness and humility. Elias watched them quietly. He knew the road ahead would not be easy. Arrogance did not vanish in a night. But perhaps, just perhaps, Victor would learn. And if not, then Clara, strong and wise, would know how to choose. As he stepped into the night, Elias lifted his eyes to the stars above the peaks. They glittered cold and eternal, reminding him of the vastness of all things. He breathed deeply, the mountain air filling his lungs, and allowed himself a rare smile. The storm had passed, and in its wake a lesson remained that would echo long after the music of the wedding was forgotten. This story reminds us that appearances are deceiving, and arrogance blinds us to true worth. Respect should not be measured by wealth status or titles, but by character and kindness. Elias Rowan proved that silence can hold greater strength than words, and that justice mixed with mercy can transform hearts more deeply than punishment alone. Never underestimate those who walk quietly, for often they are the ones who carry the greatest truths. If this story touched you, make sure to like this video, share it with others, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories that reveal the hidden lessons of life.